We're going to start at what might seem to be a very unusual place in our study this evening in order to get to the answer of a question. The question is concerning what the Lord meant when he talked about the eye of the needle. And so one of the things that we're going to first do is explain how we study the Bible here. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse number 15, it says, "Study to show yourself approved unto God." Now this is our premier verse as far as the church is concerned, as far as our lives are concerned. May not be your personal motto, but it is with regard to the overall grace movement and the thrust of our ministry here. And it says, study to show yourself approved, which simply means that you can study the Bible and come up with wrong conclusions and not be approved of God. That's why there is a struggle to get to the truth, to accurately represent what the Word of God actually teaches. Just because people go to a church, even a grace church, if the Word of God is not rightly divided, as the Scripture says here, then false doctrine is being taught by a false teacher. So the rest of the verse says, "A workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." Now the word rightly dividing there, the words, are represented by one Greek word, orthotomeo. And it means to cut straight, cut a straight line. We have orthodontists here that fix teeth or align teeth, make them straight. But in keeping with this matter of cutting a straight line, we have come up with what we call the sliced method of Bible study. And there are several words here that we'll explain just briefly. First of all, the S stands for systematical. We believe in systematic theology here. And it comes, of course, right from the Bible. Precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little, in a systematic fashion. That's how you learn the ABCs, that's how you learn to talk, that's how you learn math, and so forth. It's all in a system. You start from the beginning and you build on that. The second thing is linguistical. We go back to the original languages. Just to give you for instance, last Sunday night, we discussed Romans 10:9 and 10. And it said, if you confess with your mouth and believe, and then if you believe and confess. Now, the very same words are in those verses, confess and believe. But the first two are in the aorist, active, subjunctive. The last two are in the static present, passive, indicative. Now, what all that means is that it's not reflected accurately in the English text. It's as close as they can come without giving us a Bible that is about this big to carry around, with expanded translations. The aorist tense means at a point in time, we've talked about that. The subjunctive mood means that maybe you will, maybe you won't. If you'll believe, at a point in time, you'll be saved. That's what it says. But that's not what the verse says. It just says if you'll confess and believe. But you have to go back to the original language. Then, of course, the static present tense indicative. Indicative is the declarative mood of reality. If you have this in your heart, static present, this is what happens prior. You eliminate all options to the point in time that you embrace it personally. So that's why we endeavor to go back to the languages of the Bible. Next, we believe in isagogical study. Now that means that we look to the historical context in which the Bible was written and to understand some of the things that are said. The reason being, certain cultures had idioms, just like we have idioms. I mentioned the fact that Revelation says that the Lord's eyes were as a flaming fire. But if we eat too much, our culture says his eyes were bigger than his belly. Okay, well, do we really mean that? Well, no, it's an idiom. It's a figure of speech to represent something. And there are idioms. And we have to go back to that particular culture to understand how it was understood, how it was used, and the like. That's isagogical Bible study. The C stands for categorical. All of life is lived in categories. Every category of life has a technical vocabulary. Some, of course, is more important to us in common. Others pertains to a specialized vocabulary. You have one in your job, I have one in mine, and much of the specialized vocabulary I try to communicate to you because you have to learn that too. But all of life is lived that way. If you want general health, you have to go to a general practitioner or an MD. If you want health for your teeth, you've got to go to a dentist. Well, what am I saying? That is a category. Both are involved in health, but just with regard to different parts of the body, different purposes. And so you have to divide life that way, and you have to divide the Word of God that way. Exegetical means that we go to the word, the grammar of the original languages, and get a deeper meaning than just what we have in the surface of the English translation. Now, there are some good translations. We follow the King James because it is one of the most common, one of the most basic. It provides a standard for all of us, and it is a very good translation. However, there is no English translation that best represents all that is involved in the words of the Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. Therefore, to be a good exegete, we go deeper to get the meaning. And then, of course, lastly, we are dispensationalists. That just simply means that as you look at the history represented in the Bible, God has worked, revealed himself, and revealed his will for man in different ways at different times. Now, to understand the Bible, we break it down. This is hermeneutics. That's the science of Bible interpretation. It is not my interpretation, though I embrace it. It is what the Bible says. We do not bring our bias to the Scriptures. We bring its bias to us. If we bring our bias to it, that is subjective, and everybody's got an opinion. Well, I think it means this. Well, what do you think? Well, I think it means that. But the way the Bible speaks is, thus saith the Lord, which means he meant it in a certain way, and that's the way that we have to perceive it and apply it. Now, with regard to dispensational truth, you have to understand that in the course of history, in the Word of God, God has laid down dispensations, which means that at the start of each of these eras, he has revealed a special will for man at the time. Now, if we go to the first dispensation, the dispensation of innocence, what was man to do and not to do? Something, of course, it's in the Bible, but something you can't do today. Yeah, not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, eat of the tree of lives. You cannot apply those Bible verses today. It's an impossibility. You say you can? Tell me where the tree of life is. Where's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It doesn't exist anymore. The Garden of Eden was erased with the flood. But God then revealed his will, the dispensation of conscience, where man was at that time to meet God at east of Eden with a blood sacrifice. And on we go. And each of these additions to the knowledge and will of God is called progressive revelation. But you have to remember that there are some truths that are trans-dispensational, which means that they are all true through all dispensations. For example, the attribute of God is righteousness. In what dispensation has God ever altered that fact? None. It's trans-dispensational. When you learn that God is righteous, David learned it way back when. Noah learned it way back when. Future generations, it's the same difference. They learn the same thing you did. Some are interdispensational, which simply means that there are some things that carry over. for the dispensation of promise here into the dispensation of law. There is a crossing, as it were, of the lines of the dispensation. We call trucks that travel from one state to the next, or however many, interstate truckers. They cross a state line. And this is interdispensational truth. For example, Abraham got the covenant of circumcision under the dispensation of promise. When God started to reveal the dispensation of law, he brought that over, that particular thing, into the dispensation of law. However, when God revealed the dispensation of grace, or right here we are, and he revealed the dispensation of grace, that does not carry over today as a religious ritual. No one who participates in that as far as a bar mitzvah is concerned and so forth, that does not link you to the covenant today. It's meaningless, really, aside from just something that is sanitary and the like that's performed on male children. But it has no spiritual significance. It did under law, and it was an interdispensational truth. But of course, we live under grace, and it doesn't apply. Baptism is another one. Abraham was the Hebrew, one who crossed over. That's what it means. He crossed over the Euphrates River to get there. He went down in the water and up. That was one of the significances of water baptism. It carried over into the dispensation of law. It has no significance today, not at all. There's one baptism today, that is spirit baptism. We are not cleansed by God with any water. We are dry cleaned, of course. Okay, then there is also intra-dispensational truth, which means that there are things that are involved within a dispensation. Now, there can be progressive revelation historically, but there can also be progressive revelation dispensationally. Now, let me give you for instance. Moses got the law here at the beginning of the dispensation of law, 5 books. But pretty soon, other things started happening as Moses passed off the scene and Joshua took the people in there. So Israel got 5 books, and then all of a sudden they got the book of Joshua. Joshua passed off the scene, and God gave them judges to rule the people. And so now we have another book. All of a sudden, from 5 books, now we've got 7. As history began to unfold and the will of God was given to these people, they wrote it down in history, and they became books of the Bible. And all the way through the dispensation of law, until finally we studied what books that we have now that are part of the testimony of Jesus Christ. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Hebrews through Revelation. But those are all law books. Even though we have them in a dispensation of grace, they're still books for the dispensation of law. The time when Jesus lived here and the time when the Jewish remnant will live here, the dispensation of grace is in between. Now, to say that, one of the things that was added in the dispensation of law was the mandated bankruptcy clause. From the point when Jesus started preaching it backwards, from here on back, here's about the time of dispensational law when Jesus preached it, all the way back here to Adam. No one was required to sell all their goods. No one was. Because it's not part of it. But you have to remember that when Jesus Christ preached, 483 years of Daniel's prophecy were fulfilled already. And therefore, when he said, or just about that 480, the last 3 years were his public ministry, and then he was crucified and ascended. But immediately following that time was to be a brief interval, and then the tribulation. So once he said the kingdom is coming, he had 3 years of this prophecy and then another 7 years to go, which is the tribulation period. Now, according to Daniel, we haven't studied it yet, but according to Daniel, Antichrist is going to have control of the money in the world at that time. So what Jesus was doing was giving progressive revelation within a dispensation. This is intra-dispensational truth. This is added truth. So that Israel had to repent, believe in Christ as the Messiah, be baptized, have the apostles to lay their hands on them, and then to sell all their goods. Now, up until that point, they did not have to sell all their goods. But why did they here? Because the next thing on the horizon was the tribulation period. And, of course, the Antichrist controlling the money and the commodities of the world. So that's why this extra thing was added. And that's why we have things like, we'll turn here to Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14. And in Luke chapter 14, starting with verse number 25, it says, "There went great multitudes with him, and he turned and said to them, If any man come to me and hate not his father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, yea, and his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple." Now, why did he use such powerful language? Because in the tribulation period, he instructed, the love of many shall wax cold, and father is going to be against daughter, and mother against son, brother against brother. One is going to be for Antichrist, and one is going to be for Jesus Christ. Okay, now, here's the situation. What do I do? Do I forsake my family for Jesus Christ? The answer of Jesus is yes, at this time period. Yes, you do. If they take the mark of the beast, forget them. As far as trying to turn them, you cannot turn these people. It's too late for them. And you flee. It's not that you don't love them. That's not the point. The point is that this here in verse number 26 is called an idiom of preference. You're going to have to make a decision at this point in history. Now, it's in keeping with this that we have verse number 33. "So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he has, cannot be my disciple." If your family doesn't want to come with you, then you're going to have to leave your family. If they want to come with you, that's icing on the cake, of course. But you're going to have to make a decision with regard to serving me. Chapter 16, same book. Now, especially does this apply with money. "No servant can serve two masters." Luke 16:13. "Either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he'll hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." And since Antichrist is going to control the money, and you've got to worship Antichrist in order to get the money, you're going to have to make a decision. Is it God or is it Antichrist? Is it Jesus Christ or Antichrist? Now, Antichrist has the upper hand at the moment simply because he has everything in his favor. He's got the control. But what does that mean for you? Well, I'm going to lose my life, or lose it in the sense of I'm going to lose everything that I own as a possession and stand for Jesus Christ. It's either or. There is no wishy-washy business in the tribulation period. The reason things are so difficult in the age of grace, you can get saved and you can put things off. In that dispensation at that time, you're going to have to declare yourself or you're going to be killed. That's it. You've got to declare or you're going to die. One way or the other, you're going to die. You've got to declare. So that's in keeping with these thoughts. You have to understand this is the mindset of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and this is one of the reasons why now progressive revelation demands that the Jews, to be saved, sell all their goods. All right, now, let's go back to Matthew 5. Matthew 5. Entering the kingdom is what it's all about. Now, stay with me here because it's extremely important to an understanding of the rich young ruler and what Jesus said about the needle's eye. Chapter 5, verse 20. I say to you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, you'll in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. All right? Chapter 7, verse number 21. Not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that does the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me, Lord, Lord, we have prophesied, cast out devils, done many wonderful works. Then I'll profess to them, I never knew you, depart from iniquity. So they have a pretense. They've got a religion. They use the name of Christ, but there is no inner reality. So let's go back, therefore, to Luke chapter 13. Now, prior to the time when he used the illustration of the eye of the needle, he already began using the illustration of the gate and the door. And you need to understand that. He didn't just all of a sudden out of thin air say, well, I'll just use this illustration. It's easier for the camel to go through the eye of the needle and so forth. No, he didn't do that. He had already instructed them with previous knowledge so that he could have used this Hebrew idiom. It was a familiar idiom at that time. In fact, it was part of two. It's called an idiom of contrasting difficulty. And we'll see this in a minute. But it was an idiom they were familiar with at that time. So we're in Luke chapter 13, and note what it says there. Verse number 23. Then said one unto him, Lord, are there few that be saved? Now you remember that this is one of the things that the apostles marveled at with regard to this statement of Jesus, and said, who then can be saved? We'll explain that here in a moment. He said, therefore, strive. Agonizomai, Greek. We get our word agony from it. Agonize, to enter in to the what? Straight gate. Now, the word straight there is stenos, and it means the narrow, confining, or restricting gate. And they were familiar with that gate because there were two gates in every single gate surrounding Jerusalem and every major city in the area. All ancient cities had two gates, the big gates and the straight gate. And the reason that it was a confining gate is because people could get in, but it was a person where the keepers of the door of the gate. If it was a soldier coming in there, they could battle him because you can't get your shield in there and you can't start fighting with your sword and get in the gate as well. You have to leave those behind or go in sideways. That's fine. They just cut off their heads as they would come in. You can protect a straight gate. If they get in, however, and open the big gates, the masses of the army, the soldiers will rush in. So they had a small gate and a big gate. But the small gate was called the straight gate. And if you wanted to enter into the kingdom, that's this whole illustration. You had to enter in through the straight gate. Why? Because it meant leaving all your possessions behind. You had to do it. You couldn't get into the straight gate. And even then you had to agonize to do it. And you're eating just a little bit too much. Well, just suck it in. As you're going in to get in, you could not come in with all your possessions on you. That was the point of it. Strive to enter into the straight gate. For many, I say to you, will seek to enter in and shall not be able. Now, enter into what? Enter into the kingdom, but they want to take, let's go back to Matthew 7, the easy route. Matthew 7 and verse 13. Enter in at the straight gate, For wide is the gate and broad is the way that lead to destruction, and many there be that go in thereat. They were familiar with this illustration. Anybody approaching the city understood that from daylight to dusk, the big gates were open. At dusk, the big gates were shut. The only way in was through the straight gate. But that meant if you wanted to get inside the protection of the city, you had to leave your possessions outside or haul them in, a piece at a time, which is, of course, not practical. So they understood this, and Jesus said, look, everyone else is going to tell you, enter in through the broad gate. That's easy. Many are going in there. That's the practical thing. But I'm telling you, if you want to get in the kingdom, you got to go through the straight gate. That's the only way in, my kingdom. Verse number 14, because straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leads to life, and few there be that find it. So there it is. Jesus Christ knew the gates of the city. It was very familiar to everyone. Now let's go from here to Acts chapter 12. This particular gate also had two other names. It was called the door of the gate, or it was called the needle's eye. In chapter 12, verse number 13, it said, and as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, the damsel heard, and she knew it was Peter, but wouldn't open it up. Now, the word door there is thura. The word gate is pulon. So it is two different openings, two different barriers. You've got two different Greek words. And by the way, you have a definite article in front of the door, which means it was a specific door, a specific opening. And then you have the genitive of description. The door described, a genitive always has a tendency to show possession. The door described as belonging to the gate. There was a door in the gate. So you would approach it and you would see the big gate and then you would see the small door. And Peter went up to the door in the gate and began knocking. It was night. What wouldn't they do at nighttime? Open the big gates. They just opened the door. That's why he knocked at the door of the gate. That's what it was called. All right, let's go back to Joshua chapter 2. Joshua chapter 2. And verse 5. Story of Rahab hiding the spies. And it came to pass. Now these are verses of scripture that let us know that ancient cities, and especially Jerusalem, shut their doors and gates at night, at dusk. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out to pursue after the spies and overtake them. But she brought them up to the roof of the house and hid them on the roof. Verse 7, the men pursued after them the way to Jordan and to the fords, and as soon as they which pursued after them were gone out of the city, they shut the gate. Why? It was night time, and that was a common practice. Now let's go to Nehemiah chapter 13. Nehemiah chapter 13. And it says here that, verse 15, there were some treading wine presses on the Sabbath day, and they were bringing these things into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, to sell them, of course. And they weren't allowed to do this. All manner of wares are sold on the Sabbath, verse 16. In Jerusalem, I contended with these nobles and said, you're profaning the Sabbath, verse 17. Did not your fathers thus, and did not God bring evil on them for profaning the Sabbath? It came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and that should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And so therefore, that there should be no burden brought in on the Sabbath day from the merchants. So the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. I testified against them. And the last part of verse 21 says they no more did that on the Sabbath. Now that was the whole reason. You shut the gates at dark. And in this particular case, so that the merchants couldn't get in Jerusalem to profane it and selling these things, they kept the gates shut. But the point we're making here is that this is the understanding that Jesus had. Let's go to Esther. Esther chapter 2. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. And verse number 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat at the king's gate. All right, here we have the king's gate. It was the broad gate. It was the bigger gate. And it says that two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthon and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought by the hand of the king Ahasuerus. Now, the point that we're making here is simply that these two men were of those who kept the door. Which door? The door of the gate. When the gates were closed, there were two sentries that were set on each side of them to keep the gate so that no one would come in without authorization, official sanction, and the like. There is a door of the gate. All right? Let's go to one more of these just quickly. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 11. Ezekiel chapter 11. Now Ezekiel mentions many times where there is a door, a different Hebrew word is used, and there is a gate, different Hebrew word is used. The Spirit lifted me up, Ezekiel 11:1, and brought me to the east gate of the Lord's house, which looked eastward, and behold, the door of the gate. At the door of the gate I saw 25 men. So we have read all of these just simply to show that the gate that was the small gate that let people in after the larger gates were shut was called the door of the gate. It was also called the constraining gate or the restricting gate. So it's with this in mind, therefore, that we come to the book of Matthew. The book of Matthew, chapter 19. And verse number 16. Good master, what good thing shall I do to have eternal life? Now, Jesus already said, if you want to enter into life, which was a synonym for entering into the kingdom. Entering into the kingdom meant you're entering into life. Matthew 18 tells us that, and vice versa. If you don't enter into life, you don't enter into the kingdom. But if you enter into the kingdom, you enter into life, and so forth. So he tells them all that he has done with regard to the commandments. Note what the man asked. What lack I yet? Now, in other portions, in fact, let's just turn there. Let's go to the book of Mark, chapter 10. Mark, chapter 10. And you just hold your place there. And verse number 21. Now, just hold your place in both sections. Jesus, beholding him, loved him and said unto him, one thing thou lackest. Now, you've kept all of these commandments, well and good. You haven't kept all of the 10, no, really. But let's put it to the test. You lack something. What is that? And that is the requirement. This is Mark 10, verse 21. Unless a man forsakes all that he has, he cannot be his disciple. So what is Jesus? Now this is progressive revelation. This is upgraded information, intradispensational truth added to the law at that point because the tribulation was right ahead. And so Jesus said, you lack something. Now can you imagine? Here is a man who had great riches, and Jesus Christ said, you lack. Can you imagine? He had everything money could buy but one thing. That's getting rid of his money. That was the only way he's going to get into the kingdom and have life. Forsake all that he has, because that was the requirement at that time. Okay, now holding your place here, let's go back to Matthew 19. Jesus said, if you will be perfect, go and sell what you have, give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Come and follow me. The young man was sad because he had great, this is verse 22, great possessions. Now note, let's just use this as an illustration here. Jesus Christ did not say he would not have possessions. He said, sell what you have here, enter the kingdom, and on the other side you'll have what? Treasure in heaven. Great possessions. But it's on the other side of the gate. But to get from this side to that side, you have to get rid of the possessions you've got. Because if you join the world system, then you're part of Antichrist and his system. You've got to get rid of these possessions and you'll have treasure. It's right behind the door. The door will be open. You get in. So strive to enter in at the straight gate. It'll be a little difficult, but you can do it if you just get rid of your possessions. But he went away sad. So here's where he is going to use the name of this gate, figuratively speaking. Now we know that it is figurative simply because of this. The word I here is in the genitive of place description. It is a place that they were familiar with. It is a certain area where they could go, and they knew exactly what it was. The needle's eye. It's a genitive of place description. Secondly, the word needle is in genitive of designation. The place that you can go that is described as the needle eye, and it is designated, or in other words, named that. It is named the needle's eye. Now, where else could they have gone that they would have known what the needle's eye was all about? There was only one place. Go to any gate of Jerusalem and you had your big gates and your small door, small gate, the straight gate, or the door of the gate, or the needle's eye. They understood that. It could not have been, historically, grammatically, it could not have been any other place. In keeping with the symbolism involved in what we're talking about. Enter into what? The kingdom. How do you get through? The gate. Now, if Jesus would all of a sudden, he would have called to mind something else that they wouldn't have been familiar with, he would have had to explain it. He did not. This is part of a twofold idiom that was commonplace amongst the Jews at that time. And the twofold idiom is this. It's called an idiom of contrasting difficulty. Note what he says. He says here, that verily I say unto you, that a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now note that phrase, hardly. Why? Because it's going to be contrasted with easier in verse number 24. It is the idiom of contrasting difficulties. Now, this word occurs only 3 times, the word hardly. Duskalos is the Greek word. And you know what it means? With difficulty, food. Or with difficulty to swallow. And it was part of a twofold idiom. Have you ever heard the phrase, you've bit off more than you could chew? Well, actually, it means you've actually bit off more than you can swallow. And that's the first part of the idiom. And it has to do with a rich man hardly, and that's the word, duskalos, with difficulty swallowing. Now, it's impossible only if conditions are not met. Is it an impossibility to swallow food? Answer, no. Is it a difficulty to swallow a mouthful of food that is bulging? Answer, yes it is. It's impossible. As long as you've got this mouthful of meat, it's not cooked very well, it's tough, and didn't get its tenderizer. What do you have to do in order to swallow it? You have to reduce the volume in your mouth, and that is the whole point. You want to swallow it, get rid of most of it, chew it up good, and then you can swallow it. You've got to eliminate the volume, eliminate the mass of substance in your mouth. Then, and only then, can you swallow it. What didn't the rich man want to do? Get rid of the mass of goods that he had. And so the first part of this idiom is absolutely picture perfect. The rich man has so much, but he wants to get in the kingdom, but he can't swallow the food which gives him life until he removes most of it, removes the mass of food, and he can chew. And that's the first half of the idiom of contrasting difficulty. Now, did they understand the idiom? Of course they did. It was commonplace. Matter of fact, that was more or less the difference between some figures of speech in the Bible and what's called Hebraisms or idioms. An idiom was known culturally and universally. So now Jesus says, okay. And again, I say to you, this is the second half of the idiom of contrasting difficulties. But note he uses the word, rather than harder or with great difficulty, he uses the word easier. Yo kopo teros. So it's easier or with less effort. The first one is with greater effort or with more difficulty, with less effort this time. Shall the camel go through the eye of the needle than the rich man to enter into the kingdom of God? Now again, the same thing applies. One is difficult. The other is showing a contrast here that is easier. Here's a rich man with this big sack of goods, and here's a camel that has come up to the city with the gates closed, and the owner wants to get himself and his beasts into the protective walls of the city. What does he have to do to get the camel through the needle's eye? The place that they all knew had, number one, to take off the possessions. The camel could only get in there if they took off the possessions. Secondly, could only get in there if he kneeled down. And there's a whole lot of pulling on the reins and a whole lot of pushing on the behind to get that thing through there the time. But there's the point is he had to kneel, bow, remove the possessions, and he could get in. But the possessions stayed on the outside of the wall. So that's the second part of it. Yes, the food can come down here to the stomach, but only if you remove the bulk. Yes, the camel can get through, but first you have to remove the bulk. The impossibility of it is this. As long as the bulk is there, you can't swallow or pass through. That's what is impossible here. But if the bulk is removed from both the mouth and the camel, is it possible to pass through? And the answer is yes. I would be safe in betting, I'm not a betting man, but I would be safe in betting that you have swallowed a few bits of food yourself. But you did not swallow a mouthful where you could not chew it up and reduce the volume in your mouth. You had to handle it a little bit at a time. And that is the whole point here. In both cases, the impossibility stands if the possessions or the bulk or the volume stands. Remove the bulk and the impossibility is removed. You can both swallow or pass through. And that is the point he's making. So, let's go to verse 25. If we run out in the tape, just stay with me because I want to finish this. It won't be too much afterwards. Here is the explanation here. The disciples heard it, they were exceeding amazed. Who then can be saved? Now, are they referring to who in general? Now, this is a great hermeneutical principle. Or are they referring to a specific group? The answer is this. Where it says up here, a rich man, in the Greek, literally, there's a definite article with plausion, the rich. The definite article is a particle of comparison. The rich, relatively speaking. Some are richer than others. But regardless, it is difficult for those, whatever strata of richness they're on, above, of course, the poor that are referred to in the scriptures at the same context and history. Relatively speaking, this is the group he was talking about. So when Peter said who, the answer to the Greek tis, meaning who, has an antecedent in the rich. Who of the rich, not who of the world. You have to understand that there's a science to understanding the scriptures.